Hello and welcome to my demonstration of a PHP Web API with a test client. This is part 2, so if you are not sure where we're starting from, please go to part 1. Okay, so we finished part 1 with this example here, adding sensor to database, and that was using the process sensor script called by index.php. You can use any template instead of this file, but we don't really need to because this is going to be a web API. So at the moment all we're doing is echoing to the screen and recording into the database, and that is going to be carried out by the db_lib.inc, which is stored in a different area on the website, so it cannot be accessed directly from the URL. So we connect to the database using standard PDO. We do need to improve this. It's not highly secure. We do need to go ahead and change a few things there to make this more secure, but to keep it simple, we had this record sensors function, which was just recording by inserting into the database. So that was what was done in part 1 using this query here. So that's dblib as it is at the moment, following in from part 1, and that's the index file, and that's the script that displays to the screen, and this is what you get on the screen. So what we're going to do next is we're going to be able to pass into the URL a sensor name equal to, and then type in the sensor here. Now it's not always ideal to have spaces, but I've left it in for a little bit of complexity so that you can see some of the issues that might occur. So now that we have our data in the database, we need to create a new script, and I'm going to call this Web API. So I'm going to save this as Web API in the same area. .php, save that. So now I have a Web API, which is a completely fresh script. I don't want to mix this up with the that's been too helpful. I don't want to mix this up with adding to the database, because this wants to process the sensor data that comes in from the sensors, and this one here is to allow access to a client via the URL, and maybe other means as well. So it's also going to eventually produce an XML file, a JSON file, CSV file, which you can then download. But for now, I'm just going to allow clients access to the URL. So the first thing that needs to be done is we need to set the header to specify that we're going to be dealing with a content. We're going to use JSON for this, so we're going to send the data back to the client in JSON for this example, just to mix it up a little bit. Is a standard format for transmitting data around the web. It's a little bit smaller than, well, it is smaller than XML, so we need to include the dblib file, which I've placed now back a directory in the includes directory, so dblib.inc. So that's going to include my database functions, which connect to the database and will query the database as well. And then what we need to do is check the URL. So if you remember, I said you are going to allow for this to be dealt with. So first of all, let's do this without a client. We will use a client using the CURL functionality to actually send a request with the parameters in the URL as well. So imagine we've already had that done. What we need to do is check whether it's empty, because we're not going to process it if it isn't empty. So we're going to use get, because we're processing the get part of the URL, and it's going to be sname, because that's what I'm going to use just to be sure. So this is sname. So if that's blank, then we don't want to process it, but if it's not empty, then we do want to process it. So we're going to get the data and send to client. That's pretty much all we need to do. Otherwise, send error message back to the client. Okay, so hopefully that makes some sort of sense. And then what we want to do is inside there we need to actually go and get the data. But before we do that, I want you to see that well, you won't see it quite easily, but often they put a plus into the URL. When you actually get the data, it will have a plus. So if I was to query the database, so let's see, if I was to query the database for the name, it would have sensor plus 1, so you need to decode the URL first just to make sure to remove the plus. Let's put that message here. Okay, and then it can actually look up the sensor name. So let's do the decode, get it into a variable, so name equals URL decode, and then we're going to decode what we get from the URL. So this is what we get from the URL. There are other ways to get data from the URL, which I will mention in a future video, but I'm keeping it simple. It's quite a beginner level example this is. So what we want to do now is get some data by using a function which we haven't yet created and passing the name, because that's what we want to go and get the data for. So we're going to get the data related to a sensor for this example, so we're going to go and get its value. So just a quick reminder of the XML file that we're working with. Just open that. So we want to get the value back at this stage, and then we can look in a future video at dealing with the zeros and the ones. So back to the Web API. So we need to make this function here. This doesn't exist, so we need to make get sensor value in our DB library, and that's going to bring back some data. And then if we do get that data back, we can then deliver a response to the client. So I'll go ahead and type it all in anyway, even though that function does not yet exist. It is for those new to PHP. It is very C-like, the syntax, apart from the dollar in front of the variables. So you should be able to learn it really, really quickly. The only difference is things like this, getting data from the URL, which you don't find in C. But generally the syntax is quite similar, apart from having a dollar and not having to declare the variable, because it is in an interpreted language. So I'm going to make another function to deliver the response. Again, I haven't got this yet. I'm going to type in 200, which is okay, and sensor found, because sensor not found because it's empty. Oh, that doesn't say found, does it? Sensor not found, and then a null value because there's no data at all if it was empty. Otherwise, if it was not empty, I'm going to deliver us a response sensor found and pass in the data that I got back. So that should be okay. Now do be aware that you're not using a reserved word or anything like that. And finally, if there was a problem with any of this, we can send a 400, which is the header code for invalid request, or it doesn't know what you want. Okay, and then that's also null because you're not sending any data back. So the only one where you send the data back is if you found the data. Let's save that, and that should be okay. So now I just need to make sure that I have my curly brackets, which I should have done at the start really. I don't need one there because there's one line, but for completeness I will add this just in case I add some more data to it. So that's how you do the Web API. Now we need these two functions, so I'll just create that for now with an empty bit of code just to make sure it's there. Deliver response and put the data inside that which I need, so it's going to be the status there, the status message, because you need some variables to receive the data into. So that's for the status message, and that's going to receive the data, or null, and that's going to receive the 200 when you call it. So it's currently not doing anything, that's fine, and now I just need to go to the database to get the value. So I need this function which returns some data back. So I'm going to go into dblib, which is where all my database functions are, keeping things separate because you don't want to mess up. You don't want to mess up and have code all over the place. So all my database functionality is all in one place, and so I need this function. I might as well keep the parameter the same, and what this is going to do is go into the database. So now I'll just go through the code for querying the database for the value of the sensor. So the first thing we need to do is build a select statement for getting the data from the database. Actually, we need to make sure that we have connected to it. So db equals connect db. I already have this function in this file, which I showed you in part 1 and earlier. And so what I'm going to do now is do a try. So I want to try to do this, and if not, I will catch the error and deal with the error. So I'm going to try and make SQL equal to the select S value, which I happen to remember is in my database. Sensors were, the S name is equal to, and then what I want is quotes around that. So the value that we've passed in, so I need to put name there, and I'll show you something else in a minute. Order, I'm going to order it by the modification date, which I happen to know is called smod. So this is my script. I've put them around double quotes, so in order to get these quotes in there and to actually include them and not break the string, I just use a backslash there. So this string here is building my SQL query. Now you will need to improve on that in terms of security, but I'm just keeping this simple right now. And then what I'll do is I will echo this to the screen. I won't actually run the query straight away because I do like to see what's going to happen before I allow it to happen. So the next thing I need to do is to prepare a statement. So I'm going to run a query by preparing a database statement using the prepare function, and I'm going to prepare this SQL statement and get ready to run this. So I'm then going to query execute. You can get lots of tutorials on PDO, so just go ahead and grab some examples on those valuable websites that are out there which will help you to do this. And then I'm going to fetch the column that I know. There will only be one column in this particular query, as we're not querying for all of those, and that's it. So I'm just doing a select, a prepare, execute, and getting the value, plus I'm echoing the SQL statement to the screen, and I might just put that there so it stands out, so I know to get rid of that because I don't really auto comment it out later. So I'm going to catch the PDO exception into this variable here, and that way I can make sure that I send an error message. Now you wouldn't normally just simply echo out the message, but I'm going to do that right now just to keep it easy for the demonstration to the database. An error occurred right into the database, and I'm going to append to that because you use the dot to append in this language rather than the plus as in other languages like C# or Java or whatever. So I have my error message which is coming from the PDO exception handler, and when I have everything that I want, I mean, again, I haven't got enough error checking in all of this really, so I wouldn't echo that and then return it if there was a problem. So I should really improve on this, but just to keep it simple, that should work for our example. So we now have the Web API, which is going to check the URL and make sure that the data is not empty. It's going to decode the variable to make sure it hasn't got the plus. It's going to call this function, which I have just added to my dblib file, which is back in the includes folder outside of the web space area. I haven't tested this, so I'm going to hope that I haven't put some errors in there. And we have our deliver response, which I need to now implement. First thing you need to do is set the headers to send back to the client. So HTTP 1.1, and then you're going to send back the status and the status message, which we have passed into this function here, status and status message. So they're going to be sent back with the headers to say whether that was successful or not. We're now going to build the response and send that back to the client. So we will encode this, or we will code it into JSON. So I'm going to just copy these down because it's a lot easier to alter these, and it's the same. So we're just building an array which JSON will be able to use, or the JSON function will understand. So this data has been sent in here. We're now building a response array, and that's pretty much it. So we're now going to encode it into JSON. So let's call that JSON response is equal to JSON encode, and we're going to encode that response array just created up there, and then we can just echo that on the window for now, but we will actually get that data back from the server once we have our client. So that's making the Web API. Let's see what happens. Tidy that up a little bit and save that, and that's called web API.php. So let's open this up and run our Web API. So we need to put Web API instead of the standard index file that we have to add the data to the database, and we need to put in the correct value. So we're expecting sname equals sensor1, for example. We run that, and this is where we get the data. So let me make that a bit wider, and we can put sensor 2, sensor 3, sensor 9, sensor found. If we put a sensor that doesn't exist, let's just change that 9 to 66. We haven't got that sensor there, as you can see. Sensor not found and null. And if we put some, well, we put nothing in there, we should get an invalid request. So all of our if statements are working in here, so it's a good idea to test all possibilities. So that's all working. So the next thing to do is the client. Okay, so the client needs to be a new file, and we need to use the PHP to put all the PHP related commands in there, and then it could be any sort of template that you wish to include. I'm not really going to make this of a high standard web page, just as long as it has all of the required elements to make it into a web page. So that's now a simple web page with one head section and one body section. I'll just put a title in there, why not, and just indicate that this is the web client. Now I'm going to keep this simple. It's not going to look too great. Now what you can start off with is a form with the action. Just call it self. You can use PHP self, but I'm going to call it web client.php, and the method is going to, I can use whatever method, I could use post or get, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to use get for this. Actually, I would probably use post. Let's just try post. End the form, and then what we need is we need to be able to enter the name of the sensor. So input type equals text. So we're going to have a text box for the name to be sent. Now it needs to match the URL, so it needs to be sname because it needs to match what we're going to put into the URL, which is sname equals sensor. So it needs to be sname, and then it will have a value in there. So that's what I'm going to do. And then the button type, can't type here, submit, and name equals, give them a name so you can refer to them, and value equals find. Doesn't matter what you put in there because that's going to be displayed. Now you would do a label for here, but I'm just going to put that to keep it easy. So let's call that web client.php. I need to make sure I run that from the web server. So what I'm going to do is open web client.php. Let me have a look. Let me just run it in this one, in this tab here. Okay, so localhost, and type in sensor1, and you should see that appear. No, you won't see that appear because I've changed it from get to post. If I change that to get, you'd see it in the URL. Okay, so you'll now see it has sname equals sensor +1 and submit equals find. So that was the plus I was talking about when I mentioned that you need to URL encode and URL decode. So I'll put that as a post instead and rerun that, and you won't see it in the URL. So let's do that again. Let's rerun that again and type sensor2, and you won't see it in the URL this time because we've posted it. So what we now need to do is make sure that we can process the data that we send. So we need to say if is set, and then again we need to do post in this case because we're using post sname. So if we've posted sname, so we need to get the name into a variable. Now we might want to do some checking on that data, but as it's posted, it should be quite secure. And then I'm just going to put an echo message there. So going to Web API to get value for name, and then what we'll do is we will URL encode it just to ensure that it's in the correct format. And then what we need to do is go to the URL, which is the address of the web server, HTTP. I'm going to cheat and grab the address here. Actually, that's what it would expect to send. So let's just get all of that in there. And then what we need to do is obviously that's going to be the name that you pass in, if that makes sense. And then what we have to do is we have to use the CURL. So we're going to use the CURL to actually make some sort of a connection. So first of all, let's test this. Actually, I'm going to change this to submit because that will always be pressed. So it's much better because there might not be a sensor value in there, but there might still be the submit button value. So if submit was pressed, so if submit, then get the name, so just make sure all of that is correct, display, encode it using the URL encode, and connect to the web API. So I'm not going to do that just yet. I will do the first thing, which is just to echo. So let's go to this one and run this. So that's just I just refreshed it because it already had some data in there. So there you can see we're getting this message, and the next thing to do is to add in the CURL functionality, which is, first of all, you have to just go to a tutorial and look up how you do CURL, but you do need to use the init. I mean, you get some helpful hints when you start to type. You need to set the options, which is pretty weird, so you have to look those up. I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of those right now, but this is to ensure that the data is returned back, that it can actually send the data. Again, I would go ahead and look at those options in the curl manual, and then what we need to do is get a response from the server using curl exec. It's great, really. Nice, easy method of communicating. I've just called it W client. It could be client, it doesn't really matter. And then I'm going to echo the response. So that'll just put the response, and the response, if you remember, should be, if you look at the Web API, it should be responding in JSON format. So let's have a look at the client and see if we have something there. So let's run that, and fingers crossed it'll all work. Continue resubmission. I just need to go in and have a little look at that. I've probably typed it in wrong other than that, and then that's gone wrong, so give me a moment to go fix that. Yeah, I've done that. I keep doing this. I keep forgetting the curl opt, and it's come up now, so that's the correct one. Oh, look, so helpful. Right, so that should be fine. Let me test that. I don't mind little errors occasionally because this is what we all do. So sensor 2. Now it doesn't seem to have connected to the URL, so I'm going to go and check that as well. So I think I've missed something out here, and that's obviously the URL here. Okay, so let's test that. Save it and refresh. So let's put something in there, sensor 2, and this time you get the data, which is here. So what I'll do is I will get rid of that message, or I'll put it into a paragraph so it's not, it isn't looking too bad when it displays it on the screen. But you can see now that it looks a little bit better. And what you could do is say, don't give me the form, or you might want the form still to be displayed. It's up to you. You could actually put an else statement here, which I'll just put it in anyway so you can see. You need to put that inside a PHP tag, and then you could end the else, but you may not want to do this, so you might want to only display the form by choosing a back button or something like that. So sensor 2. So now it has not displayed the form, but obviously you'd need a button to say search again or something like that. So that's how you would surround it with an else statement to ensure that it doesn't display the form. But I'll leave it like that for now, because you may always want the form to be displayed, and you can put all of that into a div area or a paragraph. It depends on your template and how you set it all up on for your actual design of your web page. Okay, now I've put a silly little error in there, so let me just go and fix that. Oh, that's me being silly because I've taken away the end PHP. So here we go. I always put little errors when I do these things again, when I mess about with them too much. And now it's taken its time. So let's do sensor 88, which we know we don't have, and we have data not found, and let's run it again with no value, and we should get invalid request. It's taken its time. Anyway, the point is, while it's taken its time, we will see that it's going to the URL, setting the options to get the data back, and actually making the connection and getting the data back. And it's getting the data back from this here, and it's getting it in JSON format. So when we look at this, try it again and view the source. It's just a standard web page with some normal JSON data which you have access to in this here, so you can pull it apart and do as you wish. So just to complete this, thank you for watching the demonstration of a web-based API and a little test client, and I wish you well in creating one yourself.